Thank you for joining the Technical Tuesday. I think it's a hot topic that Fuching is presenting here, and I think most of us will be facing that question, challenge more and more in the future. We see that the Pharma 4.0 of ISPE is taking up a little bit everywhere. I had the pleasure to work with Fuchin on a cloud-based solution recently, and you know, he's a well of knowledge in the field. So I thought I'd extend the invitation to share some of those with us today. So Fuchin, the floor is yours. Maybe you give a brief introduction of your experience in it. And then, guys, if you have any question, put it in the chat. I'll interrupt Fuchin. I will ask him the question, and at the end, we will unmute and we can have a chit chat.
Sure. Thanks, Pierre. Thanks, ISPE, and thank you guys for joining us in this session. Thanks, Pierre, for the introduction. Just to give a little bit of more background about myself, I joined the industry since 2003. I started in GSK. I was there for about 7 years, gave me good grounding about the pharma, GAM, CSV, so on and so forth. And then I was also in Pfizer for a couple of years. And then I moved to Innova, which is X3M Pharma, followed by Amgen for 2.5 years with a greenfield plant that was exciting and tough, but exciting. And then last 3-4 years, I've been on a freelance basis as a consultant. And I would say my experience wouldn't be, you know, the hot topic of the cloud system per se. But I think if we want to discuss a little bit about validation for cloud system, for any pharma system, I think I have a little bit of knowledge that I can share and my experience about how we do certain things in certain way for certain reasons. Yep, so that's a little bit of my background introduction, and like what Pierre said, feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and Pierre will interrupt or stop me if it's a good timing that we take questions. Yep. Okay, what are we going to do today? I prefer, as I understand it, it's kind of an informal sharing. So I try to keep my slide as simple and as minimum as possible. And then we will hopefully quickly jump into Q&A, where I think exchanging of experience is more interesting to most of us anyway. Okay, so the agenda for today: business case, data integrity requirement for cloud system, what are the cloud system vendor selection assessment criteria, how do we work with the selected vendor to strategize how we're going to do validation. Of course, the important thing about any system, especially cloud system, is the service level agreement. Important thing on that is actually the disaster recovery. So let's jump straight in. Okay, business case and data integrity requirement. So a lot of the cloud system is built for purpose for certain areas of the business function. When we do want to select a system, we have to be very clear in our head, in our mind, and the project charter, you know, what is the business process that we are going into with the cloud system. Some of the questions that we have to answer, like, are these GXP related or non-GXP related? And it could be very common that we have some that are GXP and some that are non-GXP related, okay? And there's always a way that we handle them. And after we are clear about what are the processes we actually like to the business processes that we like to automate or use or to put into the cloud system, then we need to look at the data life cycle. Okay, the data life cycle, like the still hot topic about data integrity, you know, about data creation, data usage, data storage, data archiving, retrieval, so on, and destruction, and so on and so forth. So that data cycle has to be bear in mind, and it has to be one of the requirement, right? When we talk about moving these processes into the cloud system. And what is the specific system requirement in relation to the data lifecycle? Like, do we need error proving? What are the data validation rules? The data storage, database integrity, backup archiving, and restoration, right? So error proving could be simple things like no blanks allowed, or it could be like, I need the value to be a certain range of certain decimal points. And those are quite, in most cases, well-defined as part of the business requirement already. So we need to bear this in mind to make sure that the system that is selected will be able to meet all these requirements. Okay.
So, Putin, you want me to shoot you some question on those?
Sure.
Or you want me to wait a bit?
I mean, if you have question related to this slide, stop me. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I have a major one is the data deletion. When do you delete the data when you're on the cloud base? And what are the service level agreement or proof of evidence that data have been deleted by your service provider? And then the other question related to that, right? Because you talk about the data lifecycle is retrieval of the data. So what are the expectations in terms of cross-platform retrieval? Let's say you want to change from one platform to the other, or your current supplier just disappeared because it wasn't a strong business. How do you deal with getting back your data and being able to read it on another system? So any experience or recommendation on those?
Sure. I think about there are two questions. So first point about deletion, right? I think throughout the world now, it's not really related to pharma, but there is a strong regulation push among all the countries in the world about data privacy, data protection. In Europe, it will be the GDPR, and Singapore have our own data protection laws, which is not so strict previously, is being upgraded and is becoming stricter. And with the geopolitics, if you look at US, China, a lot of the countries are coming out with rules, laws, and regulation that if we conduct business in certain countries, the data has to be stored onshore or only in certain countries where they have agreements already with. So from that point of view about data deletion, if we choose the right vendor, a reputable, stable one, then we would be pretty protected in the sense that they are also business entity running in the specific countries, following the specific laws and rules and regulation. So I wouldn't worry so much, that like for example, there's a right to forget, right? There's a right to forget my data. So the service provider have to make sure that if I do request to delete my data, they have to forget my data. So from that would be my response about data deletion. For the retrieving of data and doing migration and so on. So it goes back to the earlier point. We have to be careful when we choose a vendor, and in the contract, they usually have a termination or a clause, termination clause, where they are committed to provide a way for the client to move the data out from one database to another database, right? However, contracts are contracts. If a business face bankruptcy and is no longer in operation, the clients would be in a lot of troubles, right? And then it goes to a whole different set of headaches and different set of problems, trying to get the data trying to access their data center when they are under jurisdiction, then it might not be so straightforward. So again, vendor selection is very, very important. Yeah. Pierre, did I answer your question? Do you have any
it does. It does, and I guess we're going to come to it. Like, how do you choose your vendor?
Yep. So let's move on. Of course, then we have this topic about vendor selection assessment criteria. So ideally, I say ideally that the regulated company, that means our pharma company, our GSK, Amgen, Pfizer, whatever, that is already has established process about vendor selection. And in most cases they do, and it's with procurement, but we want to look into that process, the SOP, and look for specific areas or sections and make sure they are enhanced when it comes to selecting a cloud system vendor. Why? Because of these subpoints that we need to consider which are the established players, what are the technical functionality that we want. For example, in one company I work for, our SAP or ERP critical servers are already on Amazon. And the reason we chose this service provider, as I understand, is that they got worldwide coverage. So that might be a technical functional requirement or even a geopolitical requirement, that whatever is happening in one part of the world has to be available and show up to the other part of the world, right? And a vendor quality system, for sure, we want to look at the vendor, because even though the regulated entity is the regulated entity are still ultimately responsible for all data, for all business processes, right? So we have to be careful when we say we are going to use this cloud vendor. We have to actually dig into their quality management system. Do they have a way to be able to say that, demonstrate control of the process, the data, of our business information? And in a lot of cases, cloud vendors or cloud system vendors serve multiple similar clients. And that means at the minimum, we need to look at their security, right? And look at how they ensure, how they onboard client, offboard client, make sure that our data don't get mixed up, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, subcontractors and quality agreement. If I remember, I could be wrong. If anybody know, can correct me. I think the SolarWind incident where hundreds, 80 or 100,000 US corporation got hacked through the network is related to a subcontractor that they use, if I remember correctly. So we want to be careful with how our selected cloud vendor manage their subcontractors. Do they have a similar kind of a stringent agreement with their subcontractor, like what we want, what we intend to set up with them? So that is critical, because they might be the weakest link. Yeah. Compliance, industry adoption, financial strength, and come up with your own scoring system. In a lot of cases, like for example, if I want to go for a cloud storage, there are really not many choices. I would say the major players, right, are only that few. But when it comes to other business processes kind of cloud system, for example, your regulatory affairs dossiers, for example, like your MES, even the LIMS, and of course document storage system. There are a lot of different players of different sizes in the market, and we really got to be very careful, yeah, to make sure that we go with a strong vendor financially, and who are also we know that can be trusted to be compliant with whatever industry requirements and standards that we're going to make sure they follow with us, right? Okay, I'm going to take a pause here. Pierre, any questions?
Good timing. Yeah, good timing. We have question. I like that. It sounds like we prepare. What type of control to be in place if a cloud owner changes technical requirement? How do you manage that? Is there, industry practice? Do they need to tell you what are the expectations and things you would put in the service level agreement there?
What types of controls to be in place? I'm reading the chat too. If cloud owner changes its technical requirements. I mean, in a lot of times, the client will be at a disadvantage in the sense that if as a service provider, I'm going to say that I'm serving 1,000 clients, you're just one of 1,000. The contract will be drafted in such a way that it's going to be very favorable to me as a service provider and unfavorable to you as one of the 1,000 clients. In that case, I'm going to act like a bully, which is a fact that they will just put it on the table and say, you either take it or you leave it. There's really not much control or bargaining power we have as a single client, right? However, having said that, there are a lot of platforms now that recognize our industry is a bit different. We are very regulated, and I think there's a kind of recognition like now they are interested about, okay, how can I be compliant to your Part 11, ERES? How can I be compliant to your BCP requirement, your restoration, backup, and so on? I think, especially for the bigger players, they are moving towards a direction where they are willing to listen and try to cater to the industry as a whole. So I think back to the point again, vendor selection is so important. You need to be careful and go with the right vendor and look at their track record. What have they been doing and talking to our peers in the industry. And if you ask me, can I put in contract to say you can't change your server, you can't upgrade? I think that will be quite tough. There will be very few service vendors or service providers who will be willing to subject to that kind of contract. And it will probably be very, very high cost to the individual client. It's going to be just your private cloud. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Pierre, you're going to ask me another one, or?
Yeah, I'm gonna read you the other one, which was, are there additional regulatory guidelines for the FDA or Europe for specific cloud software system or cloud solution?
No. If you ask me at this point, when as far as I know, as far as I'm concerned, there are no additional, or rather I should put it as that way, there are no additional very different guidelines from the regulators, because like I said earlier, it's still on the regulated entity to make sure that you are responsible for your manufacturing. It's on the market authorization holder, responsible for your product, have your recall procedure in place. If something happens, you still need to do your pharmacovigilance. All this is still on the entity, the regulated entity, and for good reasons, because they can't be going after the Amazons, the SAPs, the Oracles. They can't be going after them just because they serve pharma clients. It would be a very tough legal argument to say that they are now responsible for it. So it's still, as far as I know, that stance haven't changed, right? So yeah, I mean, other than that, yes, there is another hot topic about CSA, computer system assurance, where there's really nothing new, but it's about regulated entity responsible, but they would like to encourage us to be more critical in our thinking, to say that, look, which is the important part that we really need to test, which are the parts that the vendor has tested for the 10,000 times, just leverage on it. So that is another mental shift or paradigm shift that they're trying to encourage, but it's not, to me, not additional regulatory requirements or guidelines about cloud software.
Okay. There was another one. In cloud-based system, the emphasis is more on security of the data and protection of the data or data theft, right? How in a cloud-based validation system, it could be 100% sure secure? I don't think it can be 100%, right? But how will you answer that? So I believe the perception there is that are the data safer in the cloud or on my hard drive?
Okay. A few thoughts on that. So first of all, nothing is 100%, like Pierre said, right? Systems are built by human and it can be broken by human too. So I with that, it's never 100%. But if you think about it, like I like to share my experience when I was in GSK. There's an on-site fire station. The first time I joined them, I was given a tour to the site and I was like, what? Why do we have an on-site fire station, right? Because we deal with dangerous chemicals, highly flammable, and it might, cause a fire, and we need a on-site response immediately. Now, with this knowledge, right? So when we do our server backup, okay, this is years ago. I'm not saying that it's applicable now, but years ago, we used to take our backup storage tapes still and store it offsite. And then when we look at it and we think about it, does the offsite place where we store have a fire station? Of course not. So is it actually safer to store on site, just maybe in another building rather than offsite, because we have our own firefighters, right? So it all depends, right? It all depends. And if you ask me, is data more secure with the big players like Google, Azure, Amazon, compared to what we have in our own server room? I think it's safer with them, right? And for reasons like they have more financial power to invest in the latest security software technologies, and it's all highly secure. They serve a lot of clients. This is their business, right? That is really their strength. It is not my strength, even though I'm an IT guy, to say that I am always updated, always patched with the latest patch, and making sure my hard disks are always not failing. So it is their business, it's in their blood to make sure it works. For us, our key business, our core business is really manufacturing the medicine, supplying the medicine, and so on. So from that perspective, I would say that yes, it will be safer with them than with in-house.
Well, I can only, like, we had, I think it was back in 2015, 2016, we have the chief security officer of Microsoft who came to talk. And I think we're much more aware of the power of SaaS, because I've lost more thumb drive than I lost my access to my OneDrive, right? Just from personal experience. And he was saying it's a question of perception. Is where you are confident to put the data, but in his view, Microsoft business is to secure the data. Your business is to make medicine.
Yep, exactly. Okay, are we moving on? I think we should move on. I still have a few slides.
Go ahead,
we can come back to the questions soon. Okay, validation strategy, right? Okay, I'm just going to jump straight to the point. Typically, what we can leverage, what we must develop from a client perspective. Typically, we can use their URS, their DS, their FS, If they have executed test cases, test reports, their version release and reports and release notes, all this we can and we should leverage. What we usually should not leverage or we should develop on our own are the validation plan, the test cases, the reports that is used in our scenario, our localized context, and it would not be testing the whole system again. That's why I put here fit for purpose, exactly how you use it, just test it the way that we're going to use it, not everything that the system will provide. And then the VSR, the summary report, including which vendor docs are leveraged on. So I'm not sure if there's any related question here. If not, I will move on.
No, move on. I'm
Okay.
just trying to clarify in the chat what is PaaS, what is SaaS, and things like that for the people, so that we understand a little bit the difference in between. But just keep going.
Okay. I think I'm on the last slide. Yeah, already. So service level agreement. So I think we actually already spoke a little bit earlier on this. So contractual relationship, negotiating power, how is the DR conducted? And of course, we need to do regular review on the SLA with the vendor. So contractual relationship and negotiating power, right? Like I said, if you are one of 1,000 as a provider, if you are 0.1% of my business,
I lose Fuchin, or Fuchin, you're on mute.
Yep, I think you muted me. You want
Did
me to
I
stop
do
talking?
No.
I don't know. I don't know who's. Should I stop talking?
No,
Somebody
keep going.
find me too irritating. Anyway, yeah. So I was saying, if you are 0.1% of my business, it is hard for you. Yeah, but as I also mentioned, there are companies, big companies, that are increasingly recognizing that we are, as an industry, we have very specific requirements. So yeah, that's also improving in that sense. Yep. So actually, that's all I have for sharing the slides. Yeah.
So,
more questions?
Yeah, we have a question. How do you make sure country-specific regulations are met, right? And you know, so let's say you are in Ireland and you want your server to be anywhere in Ireland. How do you guarantee that? What are the checks you will do?
I'm not sure what's the context that you're asking this question. How do we?
I believe it's, as you explained that, for example, data deletion and things like that, you seems to be leveraging from the country regulation. While in Europe, you have very strong regulation. So you know that if the guy has a server in Europe, you're kind of safe there. Now, if you are in a country where there is no regulation per se on that, and you want to tap a server which is out of your country to be able to leverage off the local regulation, how do you make that assessment, justify, and do that?
I think I will be very careful if we are going with a vendor who is based in Barbados, right? or some Cayman Islands, right? Where even the tax laws are hard to reach them. Can forget about data protection laws, right? I would say go with established countries where they are known to have intellectual property protection, where they are known to respect international laws, and then you take it from there, right? And if you talk about data center businesses, there are quite a number of hubs. Interestingly, Singapore is one of a data center hub. Of course, in the region, and Australia is one hub. But if you ask me, I think Thailand is developing the industry, but Personally, I wouldn't go Thailand to store any of my sensitive information there, just for geopolitical reasons, right?
Mhm.
I mean, all these have to be considered when you're making a vendor selection, right? If it is under EU regulation, US regulation, China, even China, China FDA regulation, you know that there are certain standards the business are expected to follow, rather than countries where that standard is not there. Then yeah, we might be causing troubles if we decide to do that. Yeah.
Okay, there is a question on, and I'm not an expert in this, so that's why, Shanshan, thank you for clarifying, like differentiating the platform as a service, the software as a service, and the infrastructure as a service. I don't know if you can give us an example, because I can only see example of software as a service, but do you example of the other, the infrastructure or the service or the platform as a service? With famous name in the pharma, so we can relate. And what will be the difference, I mean, in validation and data risk based on the different systems?
I think there is a slide, or there is a chart from ISPE where they show you the different stacks, and where they show you how much of the outsourcing you're doing, basically. Right. And I remember there's a meme on that where the comparison is like pizza, right? On one end is you make the dough, you buy the flour, you make the dough, and you bake it. Everything is you're doing in-house, right? That's zero leveraging on the vendor. And on the other end, you just walk into a restaurant and you're served, right, with a pizza. You don't even bake it, you just eat it.
You need to order now. Like, you cannot even go to the restaurant anymore.
Yeah. Not now, of course. Yeah. You could order delivery, right?
Exactly.
But you still need to use your own cutlery. You still need to wash up. Yeah. But the point is there is no hard and fast rule, and the point is I go back to the earlier point, right? The regulated entity is responsible for the data that you generate during the manufacture and supply of the drugs and the medicine. And if we do outsource any part of our systems, right, it is our responsibility to make sure that we test it. It's our responsibility to make sure that it is verified or qualified, to make sure that it works, right, for us. So if you ask me, there's really I haven't seen any validation plan that says I'm using a SaaS, I'm using a PaaS, I'm using a IaaS. Yeah, doesn't matter. Yeah, it's a project to validate this process, this system, and then which part is supplied by vendor, which part I'm doing in-house, and how do I test each of this part, basically. So that validation would come from that approach, rather than saying, oh, this is SaaS. Yeah, so yeah, I hope that answers the questions.
I think it does. And thank you again, Chen, for publishing. There is I think from 2016, so it's not new, a GAMP. I think you can download if you are a member, where they make the risk assessment of the SaaS or whatever, right? And that's where they say, if you have that control, this is the risk, this is what you should put, and things like that. And I think what you're saying, Fuchin, is when you go to those kind of surveys, the more you use the supplier, the bigger you put the risk to them. And you need to ask them, what is your mitigation? And I'm happy with that. And based on that, make your assessment whether you want to take back control or you feel that they are better placed to mitigate that risk. I can share for you, that maybe just something that I can share as like Fuchin have shown in terms of backup. There was this APAC ISPE conference a few weeks back, right? And there was a guy of AVI, forget his name, I can find it back, who was sharing that they lost a huge amount of batch data, completely lost, right? So the product is out on the market, and there is no more batch data. So the action there was, and it was, in a form of discussion with the regulatory, and then they went forward to the regulator to say we lost the data, right? So and then the interesting part means that doesn't necessarily mean that the product quality is not good. I mean, they can't prove it, right? So there is this whole discussion about, so he was explaining that by bringing those new systems, you solve a lot of issue, and like Fuchin have explained, you can add the data entry point, have a lot of mitigation to avoid data integrity issue or chunk data entering in your system, but you also bring a series of new risks in the system, which you need to mitigate. And the example of Avi there was to say, well, they clearly failed, they're going to do their CAPA, but they went forward to the authority and they sat down in a meeting and they would say, what do we do? We wait that maybe the inspector never find it, but if they do, it's really bad. Or we go forward and we explain it. They went forward and that's the story. So I think they will have the video on demand of that on the ISPE website. But that's where, yeah, real life story of data integrity and cloud computing, right?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if there are any more questions. If not, this is the last slide that I have. I can share a little bit more about my experience. Like in one of the companies I work for, we decided to put the enterprise data lake on the Amazon S3 services. Simple storage, something. Yeah, it's really huge monster storage where we dump all our structured, unstructured. That means my MES data, my LIMS data, my testing data, my batch data, my supply chain data, could be a PDF, could be a R&D data into it. And then we have tools that let the scientists, researchers try to make sense of the data, pulling out all this data and making simulation on their desktop, right? So it is a very complex system. And how do we then validate such a system? The fact is, I believe this is classified as a GXP Lite. Yeah, is not really holding any master data per se. It's holding a lot of research information, but it's not the, how should I say, the primary records of any manufacturing process, any R&D process, or any supply chain process, because those reside in the different various source system. So this, I would say, is taken a very light validation approach, and to say that to justify that as a justification why we take a light approach is because there's really no information on here that we rely on to make decisions related to release of batches, to supply of batches, or even R&D of batches. We use this data to make sense of modeling, predictive modeling, analysis, yield improvement, and it gives us hints and tips on what to look out for. And then if we want to take that theory and prove it further, we go to the source system and make that changes, have a project, a CAPEX project, and say, I want to make changes to the equipment, to the line. So those are the primary records. Those are the GXP action. Whereas here on the enterprise data lake, these are all secondary information, and we are not basing any GXP decision based on this data. Okay, this is one approach to do it. It's not the only approach, but it's something for just to share with you, right? Another interesting one is the healthcare professional engagement app, where a company published an app on iOS and allowed the healthcare professionals to download and interact with the interact between the company and the healthcare professionals. Specifically, is about diabetes. In the context of the country is Indonesia, where they have exchanged a lot of seminar notes, information, training, quizzes, and so on. So then when we look at it, we think that this is very high risk. This is very high GXP. And from the business reputation perspective, this is very sensitive because it's HCP. We have some personal information like emails. So all these personal and private data privacy rules and laws all kick in on top of all this GXP related activity that may happen in the background. So we say we have to go for full validation. And the company then has already developed their mobile application development, SOP, SDLC, how we test, how we validate. So it is a full validation, and it is very strict. And before we allow the application to be published, is fully tested, and the legal team has fully looked at it due to the business reputation risk. So it is very strict. Yeah. If I don't explain and I don't give you the context, if you ask me, I would say the enterprise leg is very important. I have to be very strict. Healthcare professional on the iOS app, maybe not so strict, but it's the other way around, right? It really depends on the context and what we use the information for, and then that determines to what extent the validation will be required. So that is just one thing that I like to share. And yeah, I mean, I'm open to more questions. If not, then Pierre, is there a new message? Oh, turn on my camera. Oh.
Yep. One question, based on your experience, right? Who is the person in the regulated company that is the best person to make those risk assessment, make those decisions? How will that work in an Amgen, or the pool of people, the skill you need to have?
Typically, it starts with the business owner who wants that system, right? Because the business owner have to provide the context, what's the information or what's the system to be used for what business process. And then of course you have the IT that comes in to advise what is the risk, what kind of controls. And of course we have the quality or the QA IT or the computer system validation experts. And like what I mentioned earlier, if it may be more than just validation, we may involve the legal team, we may involve the, if there's a data privacy, HR might be involved, or the data protection officer, which is a requirement in Singapore, might be involved. So it is really a multidisciplinary team. Yeah. And end of the day, based on the discussion amongst the team, they would need to come up with a strategy on how this particular vendor system should be validated and justified based on the needs and the criticality, and before the validation plan is signed off by all these parties. That would be my recommendation. Yeah.
Ballpark figure, how long does it take when you decide to go with a vendor from on your experience to do that validation, to review that agreement, to have an idea?
Sometimes, even when I get a contract, the terms and condition, if I submit to the legal, it might take a month.
A month is still
Right.
okay, right?
I mean, we really need to be careful of the legal terms and conditions, right? The fine prints. So that usually would probably be the longest lead time. In bigger MNC, maybe 2 to 3 months, I don't know. And then with the rest of the team, it depends on how urgent and how important the project is to the site. It can be very fast. I have been involved in validation project where it takes 2-3 weeks to come up with such a strategy, to even like 5-6 months, and we can't decide on how to do it, right? So it depends, right? It depends.
Okay. Just going to ask the audience if they want to unmute themselves and ask any direct question to Fuchin. Now is a good time to do so. Go on, don't be shy. Can you share any good practice in managing the health authority regulatory GXP audit of SaaS validation lifecycle? Like, what are the questions that the authority asks you when they come? Do they understand? Do they have expert in it? Or if you say, well, I did something, they're happy?
I mean, I'm not sure if the guys here are all IT or QA or process. From my experience with FDA, TGA, I'm always the IT system owner, and if I ever appear, that is really bad, right? They are always interested in the production, the manufacturing, the supply chain, how we make product, how we supply, how we transport the product. They're very focused on the process, not so much on the system. In MGen, it was very interesting. We have EBR, we have a lot of systems that is online and happening at the same time as manufacturing. I was a little bit more involved. We set up screens to show them. We're prepared to show the regulators how we conduct our manufacturing process. But really, they're still coming from manufacturing perspective, how the batch was recorded, how I can see my deviation, how I can see the comments of QA if there's a step that is not executed properly in the EBR. They don't really care. How should I put it? They don't really focus. They don't really focus on how we validate the system. They really want to look at how we use the system, how we make sure it's consistent across all our procedure, all our systems, and how it complements the manufacturing process. And of course, we have to show evidence and proof. And in that sense, they're already validating our system, right? It has to be validated. Otherwise, it won't work, right? So from that sense, yeah, I would say this is how they would approach. And I haven't got experience with any regulators. I have gone through like 3-4 audits, not many, that comes around and say, I want to see your IT manager and ask him or her to explain to me how you validate the system. No. I will be surprised.
Is there any other regulatory authority then that would eventually focusing on that? Not the GXP, but is there other norm system, internal audit and things like that you would engage or that would be engaged by someone to come and audit that specific part?
Of course, I mean, each regulated entity got to provide evidence that they always keep their process in control, including introduction of changes to IT systems. And to prove that, each big MNCs that I work for typically have a big internal audit team that goes around auditing systems, goes around auditing IT changes. They are the ones that will be very, very focused on show me how you do this, show me you follow our SOPs. But again, it is internal to demonstrate that we're in control and that the system remains as a validated system. So it's not so much of an external authority or regulator, but internal team to satisfy ourselves that we really are in control. And if ever anybody asks, how do you manage your changes? We can just show them, this is how we manage. And then the question is proof. How do you make sure it's sustainable? How do you check that it's effective? Then these are the audit reports. Yeah. So that's how it's going to be from my perspective. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Any more questions, guys? Otherwise, I think we can close it here.